I do try and be as comprehensive and as obsessive, really. That's, I think, the key, my obsessive annotation style for remembering what I learn. This is how I do it for works that I feel are of vital importance in my own personal literary education. So yeah, massive mind map, lots of notes around context. Today I want to talk to you guys about how I remember what I read, and not only remember it, but how I integrate what I read and what I learn into the kind of wider network of my own personal intellectual development. It's an interesting paradox in these kinds of videos. On the one hand, they are very idiosyncratic and tailored to an individual personality, sensibility, and individual psyche, but yet at the same time, they are widely applicable and shareable. That is something that I find very interesting. So I thought I would throw my hat into the ring and share with you how I go about learning and remembering what I learn. So I'm going to give you 5 tips. I'm not claiming these to be universal decrees, but these are practices that work very well for me in terms of retention, depth of understanding, and assimilation with the other parts of my learning. Right? You want to make a network, you want to make a constellation that is interconnected and not just boxed off into compartmentalized realms of knowledge. That is for me the goal in any case. W.H. Auden described Shakespeare's intelligence as assimilative intelligence. Shakespeare was able to draw in through the magnetism of his genius all kinds of different strains and streams and currents of thought and ideas and aesthetic principles into the incredible art that he produced, timeless and superlative. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Shakespeare or trying to set out these 5 principles with the implied message that you can be Shakespeare. Shakespeare is Shakespeare, and we are ourselves, and we just got to do the best with what we've got. So, to add a synthesis and a recall of the things that we read and learn, we can take inspiration from Shakespeare and assimilate our own learning, reading, and apply that to our own lives. Without further ado, these are my 5 tips. Now, first of all, annotate your books. Okay, if you get a book from the library or you borrow it from a friend, that's a different story. But some people tend to accumulate very luxurious deluxe editions. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you really want to engage in a dialogic manner with the text that you're reading, you're going to need to be taking notes and writing back in this kind of serve and volley with the text in question and the author of that text. Of course, you can do that in a notebook, and I will show you some of my notebooks as well. Ideally, for me, is to write in the margins and to plant a thought in the wayside of the text, on the shore of these paragraphs, and see it blossom and bloom. Especially when you come back to rereading, which is something I highly recommend. You then follow the traces of your earlier lines of flight, and that is something enriching and is also a marker of your own progress. And that also leads us as a nice segue into my second tip, which is to audiobooks chronologically. So we're going to have a look at this bookcase that I have here to hand, and I will show you what I mean and why ordering books chronologically is advantageous to retention and depth of understanding. So this bookcase is divided into 3 main sections. We've got 2 rows of poetry, then we've got 3 rows of fiction, and then we've got 1 row along the bottom of nonfiction. And all of these are running from left to right chronologically. And what that allows is that allows you to develop a kind of spatial memory interlinked with time, visually represented layout of the great conversation of classic works of literature, the greatest thoughts that have been thought, to the most beautifully phrased expressions of human experience. And every work is an utterance that is responding in some way, whether directly or indirectly, to every utterance that came before it, all the way back into the silence of prehistory, of pre-literacy. And that is a very powerful idea, and that enables one to make contrasts and comparisons and to see echoes and motifs, recurrences, convergences and divergences. And this is an important way of developing critical thinking and helps you to see the lineage of ideas and aesthetic movements, and that helps you to remember them. When you understand something very well through active engagement with that object, that text, that idea, then you are going to remember it better rather than skimming superficially over the surface of it and quickly moving on. So by ordering your text chronologically, you are able to have this spatial kind of codex of great ideas and great art that you can rifle through and index works according to the quality that they have produced, the novelty of the ideas, the reconfiguring of old ideas into fresh terms. And that's a very powerful way of just a rich and multivalent, complex engagement with works of art. It's only going to help you to think better and to understand better. So annotate, and then think of your annotations, think of this individual text as one utterance in a practically endless stream of utterances that have come before it and will go on to come after it. An idea that T.S. Eliot posited in the terms of a text that is always transfigured by the texts that came before it and will be transfigured in turn by the texts that come after it. Both antecedents and posterity have this active and dynamic reappraisal of every great text. And the only way that you can engage with that is to read those texts and understand them well, actively engage in a dialogic manner with those texts, and then do the work of interpretation, which is always a practice of comparative analysis. Now, my third tip is to keep your mind sharp, to keep your mind active, to challenge your cognitive capacity in fresh ways. Now, I'm a massive reader. I read hundreds of books every year. I am writing every day. I am engaging with the great works of literature and trying in my own small way to add to that conversation, mostly failing, but always striving to become a part of the great conversation of ideas and human expression through language. And there's different ways of doing this, and I've talked about this in other videos. So, playing a musical instrument, learning a new sport, learning a new skill, learning to cook, taking up judo, learning to skateboard. There's different ways of doing this, and one particular way is to practice a very different kind of thinking and engage a different part of your brain. So you have the creative aspects of your brain. Those synapses are whirling away when you're imagining vividly this kind of snowy backdrop of some Tolstoy novel, right? And trying to understand the implications of his ideas. But if you do that all the time, you do get comfortable in that. You get fluency, right? You get fluidity, you get dynamism, but you also can get complacent. And a way to counter that is to do something completely different. And one way that I found to be fantastic to do this is the Brilliant app. And Brilliant are the sponsor of today's video. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, in data analysis, in programming, in AI. There's just so much, and it's so interactive and visual and so stimulating. So this has just been a really great way to challenge and revivify those parts of my brain. It's this kind of gamified way in which you can, in 15 minutes, just light up some new synapse that you didn't know was there, that lay dormant. As somebody who has a business of my own, I like the kind of case studies that help me to have a better grasp of dealing with financial elements of running a business. And these games have been developed by some of the greatest minds of the present time. Researchers from Ivy League universities in the States have come together to propound fun and invigorating ways of learning. If you use this QR code or the link below that I've pinned in the comments, you get a 30-day trial of everything that Brilliant has to offer, as well as 20% off on an annual premium prescription. So do check it out. My fourth tip is to take these notes and transfer them to a new form and kind of solidify them with context. Now, what I mean is that every work of literature does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in, as I said, this dialogue of utterances is one way you could put it, but there's also historical context. And we must remember that every work of even of imaginative literature that we engage with is actually an act of engaging with a historical document, which is quite cool to think about. A historical document that represents the zeitgeist of a particular time and place. And one way to understand that on a deeper level, and again, by doing this, to remember what you learn, is to explore the context and then to move between text and context and back from context to text. Another way of putting this is to move from the particular of the text to the general of context, or the particular of the text, particular example of the text, to the general of themes and ideas and principles. And when you're reading through a book and you're making notes in the margins, it's messy, it's sporadic, it's organic, it's intuitive, but it's not really gonna give you the bigger picture. So what I like to do is take my notes and transfer them onto my laptop, and then to do some digging around and some research around the context of the particular time and place, information about the author, as much fortifying information as I can find, and then to put that all together in a document of some kind, and then either make a video if you're on YouTube or thinking about starting a YouTube channel. It's a fantastic way to solidify and entrench your learning and your memory of the things that you read. Or if you don't have any plans to start a YouTube channel, then you can tell it to a friend, or write an article on it and submit it to a magazine, or just keep a diary. This is a big part of my daily life. I will show you a stack of my diaries in which I, write about the weather and about, my little son Alfie and the new skills that he developed overnight. But I will also make notes on what I've been reading. So that is a principle that I do, and you can just do that for yourself. You don't have to share it, but definitely teaching it, explaining it, writing it up into a coherent, cohesive whole with context as well is just one way of really remembering and learning. So that was my fourth tip. My fifth tip is to reread. Now, in this day and age of the kind of quantification and the gamification of reading, there's a whole discourse around this. And I think it's really up to every individual person. What is your most natural relationship to literature? Because at the end of the day, no one else cares about anyone else's reading stats. It's really for yourself. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel the pressure to read a lot. And I love that pressure in a way. And as a writer, I take it as my responsibility to be as well read as I possibly can. And I talked about this in my previous video on this kind of topic. And that, for me, is about reading well and reading deeply, but also reading a lot. You've just got to read a lot of books. But you've got to find that balance. Now, this is why I want to talk about rereading, because for me, rereading is something that it's a kind of panacea, it's a kind of cure-all antidote to this pressure to kind of consume books. And if you feel yourself resisting rereading, then you know that maybe you need to readjust your mindset. Again, I'm not saying anyone else has to do this, but this is for me. I like to reread a minimum of 10 books a year. It can be more than that, but that is the minimum. And if I feel myself resisting that, if I feel like, but I want to go on to the next new thing, then I know I need to take a breath and reassess my principles and my aims. And it's to be well read, it's to have a deep remembrance and engagement and coexistence with these great works of art, not just to race through them and forget them. So rereading is one way to do that. Vladimir Nabokov said that good readers are rereaders, and if you don't reread, you're not a good reader. It's pretty rhetorically spicy. I'm not going to make that claim, but certainly it's something that is definitely one of my most important tips to deeply understand what you do. So I'm just going to run over them again, and then I'm going to show you a particular example from my shelves. So first of all is to annotate, be in dialogue, be actively engaged, write back against the grain or in some kind of jousting or conversational way with the author or the text in question. Number 2 is to structure your library and your collection of books chronologically in order to have a spatial awareness of the great ideas and the lineage of those ideas. Number 3 is to keep yourself cognitively sharp by engaging in new practices, new skills, new challenges. And like I said, for me at the moment, I'm doing the Brilliant app. And then my 4th is to transfer your notes and your thinking around a particular text from the margins of your book onto your laptop or into a notebook, into video form, or even into a voice note. I didn't mention that, but make your own voice notes, make your own private video if you don't want to share it online. It's all a form of documentation and cataloging of your intellectual growth and development, and it's something that you can always return to and follow, like I said earlier, the traceries of your growth. And then my 5th tip is to reread, and you're not going to reread everything, but choose books that you found very enriching, very valuable, or that you just loved, and make a concerted, conscious effort to return to them. But let's actually just go through these 5 steps in a practical form. So here is this bookcase that we've got to hand here. I'm going to pick out a book here. Let's go for John Milton's 1667 epic poem, Paradise Lost. This is a great and influential work of literature, but it's not easy. It's a bit of a mountain to climb. That's my opinion. I don't love this work, but I know that it's been very impactful on the works that have come after it. So yeah, here we've got Paradise Lost, and I'll show you. Here we've got annotations, right? Notes that I've made in the margins, engaging with the text, noting allusions, noting patterns, noting key passages, key characters, traits, motifs, right? There's just so many different ways in which you can annotate. Maybe I'll make a video about that in another time. I will show you my transference of these notes. I've got my diaries here where I record my notes, and then I've got where I also record my thoughts and the kind of ephemera of my day-to-day engagement with the work that I do and the books that I read and the videos that I make. And then here is my laptop notes for John Milton's Paradise Lost. I went on a really massive deep dive of the English Renaissance, and I made mind maps here of key dates and other key texts. So have a look at this. Admittedly, I don't do this for every single book I read, but I do try and be as comprehensive and as obsessive, really. That's, I think, the key, my obsessive annotation style for remembering what I learn. This is how I do it for works that I feel are of vital importance in my own personal literary education. So massive mind map, lots of notes around context, around Milton's life, around the English Renaissance, all of these key factors, biblical allusions, context to add weight, rigor, and depth, and range to, and scope and scale to my understanding of Paradise Lost. And then, like I said, the 5th point is to reread. And I've reread parts of Paradise Lost. I haven't reread it cover to cover, but I'll get there eventually. Right, so those were my 5 practices, which I'm retrospectively going to call my obsessive technique to remember the things that I've read and learned. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about these practices. Do you do something similar? Do you do something else? Would love to hear from you. Don't forget, again, that you can get 20% off a year subscription to the Brilliant app, as well as a free 30-day trial if you scan the QR code or follow the link with my name. Thanks so much for watching, and speak to you all soon.